They say queens are supposed to die with dignity. But dignity was the one thing the French Revolution made sure Marie Antoinette would never have again. When the so-called Madame Deficit sat trembling in her filthy cell at the conciergerie, she wasn't a queen anymore. She was a carcass in waiting. The stone walls around her dripped with condensation like they were sweating death itself. The floor was caked with straw soaked in blood and human waste, and the air was so thick with rot that you could taste the river Seine every time you breathed in. Her toilet was a bucket in the corner. And yes, 2 armed guards were ordered to watch her every second, even when she used it. The woman who once dined on gold-plated plates now couldn't even relieve herself without a snickering audience. Revolution, it seemed, had a twisted sense of equality. They tied her hands so tightly that the rope chewed through her wrists. The guards called her the Widow Capet now, as if stripping away her name could strip away her identity. When she tried to pray, they laughed. When she cried, they told her the rats would comfort her. And those weren't just small rats. These were Parisian sewer beasts the size of kittens, bold enough to crawl over her feet at night, nibbling at the hem of her shift. The straw she slept on was changed once a week, maybe, and often matted with menstrual blood. When she asked for clean cloths, the guard said, "Royal blood isn't special anymore." The prison doctor recorded her uterine bleeding in his notes, clinical and cold, like she was a specimen in a lab rather than a woman slowly falling apart. Every indignity was intentional. Every cruelty designed to turn the Queen of France into something subhuman before they let the guillotine finish the job. They called it justice. It looked a lot like performance art in hell. 2 guards stationed in her cell at all times, one at the door, one at her bedside. They weren't allowed to blink, apparently, because the records show they even watched her while she slept, or tried to. When she washed herself with a single bucket of cold water she was given each morning, they commented on her body like farmers at a livestock auction. "The revolution has done you no favors, widow," one of them reportedly said. She stared straight ahead and said nothing, because what could she say? She'd once been the most powerful woman in France. Now she was an exhibit in a museum of misery. Her food was no less theatrical. Bread so stale it cracked her teeth. Soup that looked like it had been strained through a sewer grate. And sometimes, if the guards were feeling generous, a piece of meat so spoiled that even the rats refused it. When she shivered in the cold, they told her that perhaps France wouldn't have frozen if she hadn't spent so much money on diamonds. "Maybe the pearls kept you warm," one sneered. And in the darkness of that cell, she learned the revolution's dirtiest secret. Vengeance doesn't clean anything. It just replaces one kind of filth with another. But the worst torture wasn't the hunger, or the filth, or the blood. It was the silence. They took her son, the young Dauphin, and placed him with a cobbler, who was told to re-educate him. Translation: beat royal pride out of him, teach him revolutionary songs, and make him believe his mother was a monster. Sometimes, through the stone floor, she thought she could hear his voice, faint and distorted, like a ghost crying beneath her feet. The guards would mention him casually, saying, "He asked about you today. Widow, said he doesn't miss you." They did it just to watch her face crumble. When she tried to send a letter to her sister-in-law, it was intercepted and read aloud for the guards' entertainment. They laughed at her handwriting, mocked her spelling, and turned her final attempt at hope into an after-dinner joke. By the time she stood trial, she looked like death already. Her hair had turned ghost-white, her skin ashen, her body thin and trembling. And then came the most grotesque charge of all incest with her own son. That's right, the revolutionary government tortured an 8-year-old boy until he said his mother had abused him, just so they could make her execution seem moral. When the accusation was read aloud, Marie didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply said, "I appeal to all mothers." And for one brief second, the courtroom fell silent. Even the revolutionaries, couldn't quite look her in the eye. But pity doesn't last long when you've got a guillotine to feed. The verdict was decided before the trial even began. When they sentenced her to death, she didn't flinch. She just stood there, wrists bleeding through the rope, and waited for them to take her away. That morning, they hacked off her hair with dull scissors, because God forbid the guillotine blade get tangled in it, and paraded her through Paris in an open cart. Her husband had been given a closed carriage. She got the criminal's wagon, the kind used for murderers and thieves. The crowd jeered, threw rotten vegetables, shouted Austrian whore, and worse. A few just stared, mouths open, as if they couldn't quite believe this ghostly woman was the same queen who once ruled Versailles. The ride took over an hour, and every jolt of the cart made her wince from the pain of her still bleeding body. But witnesses say she kept her head high, refusing to look down, refusing to give the mob what it wanted, a broken queen. When she climbed the scaffold steps, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot, and her final words were, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." The crowd roared when the blade fell. Then came the silence. The eerie, hollow silence of a nation that realized it had just murdered a woman for the crime of being a symbol. Her body was dumped in a mass grave, her head tossed in separately. No name, no ceremony, just another body in the pile. It took over 20 years before they decided to dig her up again. And even then, no one was entirely sure which bones were hers. But maybe that's fitting. France had wanted to erase Marie Antoinette completely, to make sure no one remembered the woman beneath the powdered hair and scandalous reputation. Yet here we are, 2 centuries later, still talking about her. Maybe the revolution didn't kill her legacy after all. Maybe it just made her immortal in the worst, most horrifying way possible.